You are about to view a factual representation of our legal battles. There is no commentary here, just unfiltered, unedited, and raw footage. We are taking you straight to the front lines of justice to observe the system exactly as it operates.
Stop! Identification now! Step away from the vehicle!
I'm a federal judge! My credentials are in the vehicle! There's no probable cause for this
Don't
stop.
argue! Papers, now! Step back or I will place you on the ground!
I am a federal judge! My children are with me!
The Whole Foods on Hennepin Avenue was bustling when it happened. Saturday morning, 10:23 a.m. The kind of Minnesota autumn that painted everything in gold and crimson, crisp air carrying the smell of fallen leaves and fresh coffee from the cafe inside. Judge Lorraine Ashford had pulled into the lot for a quick grocery run before heading back to her mother's house. Still in weekend clothes, cream sweater, dark jeans, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. Her 9-year-old son, Damon, was asking about what Grandma might cook for dinner. Her 7-year-old daughter, Zoe, was already sneaking grapes from one of the bags. Just another Saturday errand. Except 3 ICE agents were stepping out of an unmarked black Tahoe she hadn't noticed parked 2 rows over. Their body cameras were already rolling, recording what would become the most expensive grocery trip in Minnesota history. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Agent Vincent Hargrove led the approach. His partners, Agents Denise Fullerton and Keith Rawlings, spread wide in a tactical formation like they were cornering something dangerous. Lorraine saw them coming as she lifted a paper bag into the trunk. Read the spacing, the hands hovering near their belts, the body language of men who'd already made their decision. 23 years on the federal bench had taught her to read people in seconds. Federal agents, immigration, and customs enforcement patches visible on their tactical vests, moving toward her rental SUV like she was already guilty of something. She knew where this was headed before Hargrove reached her bumper. Zoe noticed them first. Her small hand froze mid-reach for another grape, her eyes going wide at the armed men approaching. The tears started before Lorraine could say anything. Quiet at first, then building into frightened sobs that cut through the autumn air. Damon stopped mid-sentence about dinner. The grocery bag slipped from his fingers, oranges rolling across the pavement as he stared at the approaching agents, his excitement fading into something no 9-year-old should ever feel in a parking lot with his mother. Afternoon. Hargrove's voice cut through Zoe's cries. Flat, bureaucratic, rehearsed. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, conducting a compliance check in this area, need to see identification and proof of legal status. Lorraine kept her hands visible, moving slowly to place the grocery bag she was holding onto the trunk's edge. 23 years of courtroom composure kicked in, despite her daughter's sobs growing louder beside her. I'm a federal judge, United States District Court, Northern District of Texas, Judge Lorraine Ashford. She kept her voice level, clear enough for the body cameras. My identification is in my purse in the vehicle. I'm happy to have my credentials verified through the federal judiciary. Hargrove didn't move, didn't acknowledge the credentials. Everyone claims to be someone important. Papers. Now, the dismissal landed like a slap. Lorraine felt the familiar heat ignite in her chest, the quiet fury that came from being treated like this in a grocery store parking lot with her children watching. Her daughter crying, her son frozen in fear, all because 3 federal agents saw a black woman in casual clothes and made assumptions. Officer, you have no reasonable suspicion of any criminal activity. Lorraine's voice sharpened but remained controlled. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable seizures. Demanding identification without probable cause or articulable suspicion violates clearly established constitutional law. I'm a sitting federal judge. I rule on these cases. Zoe's small body pressed against Lorraine's leg, her fingers gripping the fabric of her mother's jeans. The sobs came harder now, her face buried against her mother's thigh. Mommy, I'm scared. Mommy. It's okay, baby. Lorraine placed a gentle hand on her daughter's head while keeping her eyes on Hargrove. Stay close to me. Damon had moved to his sister's side, his arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her even as his own hands trembled. His eyes darted between the agents, wide and frightened, watching every movement like a child who suddenly understood the world was more dangerous than he'd imagined. But it wasn't okay. Fullerton moved to the passenger side of the rental SUV, peering through the windows. Rawlings positioned himself near the cart, cutting off any path toward the store. The black Tahoe blocked her from behind. She was boxed in. Bystanders were starting to notice. A woman loading her own groceries 3 spaces over pulled out her phone. A Whole Foods employee in a green apron rushed toward the commotion, confusion and alarm on his face. An elderly man near the store entrance stopped to watch. The autumn sun filtered through scattered clouds, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Leaves skittered across the pavement in the breeze. And Judge Lorraine Ashford, who had spent over 2 decades upholding the Constitution from the federal bench, stood surrounded by agents who saw nothing but her skin color. Lorraine reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat. Hargrove's hand moved to his belt. "Stop. Don't reach for anything. Step away from the vehicle. I'm retrieving my identification." Lorraine kept her voice steady. "You asked for documentation. It's in my purse. Step away from the vehicle now." The command hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Around them, the parking lot continued its Saturday rhythm. Families loading SUVs, couples walking hand in hand toward the entrance, the smell of roasted coffee drifting through the automatic doors. But more people were stopping now, more phones coming out. The Whole Foods employee stood frozen near the cart return, unsure what to do. Lorraine stepped back from the car, hands raised where Hargrove could see them. "I'm complying. I'm Judge Lorraine Ashford, United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. I'm unarmed. My children are with me. There is no reasonable suspicion for this stop. This is an unlawful seizure." She said it loud enough for every body camera, every bystander phone, every witness in that parking lot. Hargrove grabbed her wrist the moment she cleared the door. His grip was iron, twisting her arm behind her back with practiced efficiency. Fullerton moved in from the other side. The handcuffs were cold against her skin, the metal biting into her wrists as they clicked shut. Zoe's scream split the autumn air. The 7-year-old collapsed to her knees on the pavement, her small body heaving with sobs. "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," the word repeated like a desperate prayer, her hands reaching toward her mother even as the distance between them grew. "It's okay, baby. Stay right there. Don't move." Lorraine kept her voice steady even as her heart shattered. "Someone call my mother. Eleanor Ashford. Her number is in my phone." Damon stepped forward, his small frame trembling but his chin raised. His voice cracked high and frightened but determined. "Leave my mom alone. She's a judge. She's a federal judge. You can't do this." Rawlings blocked his path, one hand raised in warning. "Stay back, son." "I'm not your son." Damon's voice broke completely. "That's my mom. Let her go." Lorraine turned her head as Hargrove walked her toward the black Tahoe. "Damon, take care of your sister. Someone is going to call Grandma. Stay with the nice people. I'll be okay." "I promise I'll be okay." The Whole Foods employee rushed over, kneeling beside Zoe, trying to comfort her. A woman with silver hair approached Damon, speaking softly, her phone already pressed to her ear. Bystanders formed a loose, protective circle around the children. The Tahoe's door opened. Hargrove guided her head down as they loaded her into the back seat. Through the tinted window, Lorraine watched Zoe reach toward the vehicle, her small arm extended, fingers grasping at empty air. Damon held his sister back, his own face streaked with tears he was trying to hide. The door slammed shut. The last thing she saw was her daughter collapsing against her brother, both children clinging to each other in a parking lot full of strangers. The Tahoe pulled out of the lot at 10:41 a.m. Lorraine sat in silence, wrists aching from the handcuffs, and listened. Hargrove drove. Fullerton sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone. Rawlings had stayed behind, presumably dealing with paperwork, or the children, or the growing crowd of witnesses. The radio crackled with dispatch codes. The GPS showed a route northeast, 34 minutes to the processing facility. "That's 4 from this zone this week." Hargrove's voice was casual, conversational, like he was discussing lunch plans. Regional's going to love the numbers. Fullerton didn't look up from her phone. These neighborhoods are easy. Nobody fights back. The words landed in Lorraine's gut like stones. Quota systems, targeting minority neighborhoods, easy numbers, nobody fights back. She kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, but her mind sharpened to a razor's edge. 23 years on the federal bench, appointed by a Republican president who'd called her a model of judicial integrity, confirmed unanimously by the Senate 98-0, hundreds of cases decided. Fourth Amendment jurisprudence shaped by her rulings. Constitutional law students studied her opinions in classrooms across the country, and here she sat, handcuffed in the back of a federal vehicle, listening to agents casually admit to systematic racial profiling. She had ruled on cases exactly like this: defendants who claimed their Fourth Amendment rights were violated, plaintiffs who alleged patterns of discriminatory enforcement. She had weighed evidence, considered arguments, issued opinions that shaped how these laws were applied. Now she was living it. The Tahoe merged onto the highway. Minneapolis slid past the tinted windows, ordinary and indifferent. Somewhere behind her, her children waited with strangers. Her mother would be receiving a frantic call any moment. Her judicial chambers in Dallas sat empty, her nameplate on the door, her robe hanging in the closet. Lorraine closed her eyes and committed every word to memory. The exact phrasing, the casual tone, the systemic corruption hiding behind badges and bureaucratic language. This wasn't just her case anymore. This was evidence of something much larger. And unlike the others who'd been detained in these easy neighborhoods, Judge Lorraine Ashford knew exactly how to make them pay. The facility smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Lorraine was led through intake, still handcuffed, her wrists raw where the metal had dug in during the ride. Voices echoed off tile floors. Keyboards clicked. Phones rang in distant offices. No one looked at her face. She was just another file, another number, another body moving through the system. A processing agent named Kilpatrick took her fingerprints with bureaucratic indifference, pressed each finger to the scanner like he'd done it 10,000 times before, which he probably had. Name? Judge Lorraine Ashford, United States District Court, Northern District of Texas. Kilpatrick didn't look up. Date of birth? March 7th, 1972. I'm a sitting federal judge. I need you to verify my credentials through the administrative office of the U.S. courts. All in due time. The same flat deflection she'd heard 3 times already. Address? The photograph came next. Front-facing, side profile, the flash harsh against the institutional beige walls. 23 years of distinguished service, and now her face would exist in this database alongside actual criminals. They moved her to holding cell 4, 8 by 10 feet of concrete painted the color of nothing, metal bench bolted to the wall, fluorescent lights humming overhead at a frequency that drilled into her skull. The door locked behind her with a heavy mechanical click. Lorraine sat on the bench and let the cold seep into her skin. Time moved differently in confinement. Minutes stretched into eternities. She counted the ceiling tiles, 247. Counted them again to be sure. Ran through case law in her mind like prayer beads. Terry v. Ohio, Illinois v. Wardlow, Rodriguez v. United States. The standards for reasonable suspicion that Hargrove had ignored completely, but the case law couldn't quiet the other thoughts. Where were her children? Was Zoe still crying? Had someone reached her mother? Was Damon trying to be brave, holding everything inside the way he did when he was scared? Were they still in that parking lot, surrounded by strangers, waiting for someone to tell them their mother was coming back? The not knowing was worse than the cell, worse than the handcuffs, worse than the humiliation of being processed like a criminal in the country she'd sworn to serve. Lorraine pressed her palms against the cold bench and began building her case. Fourth Amendment violation. Unlawful seizure without probable cause, without reasonable suspicion, without any articulable basis beyond the color of her skin. Equal protection. Selective enforcement targeting minority neighborhoods. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her children's trauma, witnessed and documented by dozens of bystanders, pattern and practice. The quota conversation, the systematic targeting, the casual admission of institutional racism, each element another brick in the wall she would build around them. The fluorescent lights hummed. The clock in the hallway ticked forward, and Judge Lorraine Ashford sat in that cell, constructing the architecture of their destruction. 4 hours and 17 minutes after Hargrove had grabbed her wrist in that parking lot, the cell door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, gray suit, supervisor's badge, nameplate reading P. Garrett. Her face had the particular pallor of someone who had just realized exactly how badly her subordinates had miscalculated. Judge Ashford, not a question. I'm Agent Pauline Garrett. There's been a situation. The situation is that your agents detained a sitting federal judge without probable cause, ignored her repeated identification, and held her for over 4 hours while her minor children were left with strangers. Lorraine stood slowly, her legs stiff from the metal bench. That's not a situation. That's a constitutional violation. Garrett's jaw tightened. We've confirmed your identity with the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. You're free to go. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just bureaucratic confirmation that they'd made a catastrophic mistake wrapped in language designed to minimize accountability. I want copies of all body camera footage from today's incident. Lorraine kept her voice level, each word precise. I want the incident report. I want the names and badge numbers of every agent involved, including you. I want documentation of the reasonable suspicion that supposedly justified my detention. You can file a formal request through proper channels. I'm filing it now, verbally, on whatever recording devices are operating in this facility. Lorraine stepped closer to Garrett. Agent Vincent Hargrove, badge number visible on his vest during arrest. Agent Denise Fullerton, Agent Keith Rawlings, and you, Agent Garrett. I want all of it documented. Garrett's expression hardened, but her eyes betrayed something else. Fear, maybe, or the dawning recognition that this wasn't going away quietly. We apologize for any inconvenience, Garrett said. Standard procedure in these operations. Lorraine almost laughed. Almost. Unlawful detention of a federal judge is not an inconvenience. Traumatizing my children is not standard procedure. What happened today was a constitutional violation documented by your own body cameras, by bystander recordings, and by my testimony. She collected her belongings from the property desk, her movements deliberate. Expect to hear from my attorneys, and expect this to be very, very public. She walked out of the facility into late afternoon sunlight that felt too bright after hours under fluorescent humming. The autumn air hit her face, sharp and clean. Somewhere across the city, her children were waiting. Lorraine Ashford had survived the cell. Now the real work would begin. The taxi pulled up to the curb at 3:47 p.m., 20 minutes from the facility to her mother's house in St. Paul, the longest 20 minutes of her life. Lorraine had barely opened the door when they came running. Zoe burst through the front entrance like something had launched her, her small legs pumping across the lawn, her face twisted with a mixture of terror and relief. She collided with Lorraine's body before she'd even stood fully upright, arms wrapping around her waist with desperate strength. Mommy, mommy, mommy. The word came out broken, muffled against Lorraine's jacket. Zoe's entire body shook with sobs that seemed too large for her 7-year-old frame. Damon followed seconds behind. He was trying to hold it together. Lorraine could see it in the set of his jaw, the way he walked instead of ran, the 9-year-old's attempt at composure. But the moment he reached her, the moment her arm wrapped around his shoulders and pulled him close, everything crumbled. He buried his face against her side and cried. Lorraine knelt on the brown grass of her mother's front lawn, holding both children so tightly her arms ached. She could feel their hearts pounding against her chest, could feel the fear still trembling through their small bodies, could feel something fundamental that had broken in them today. I'm here, babies. I'm right here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. The taxi pulled away behind her. Neighbors watched from porches and windows. None of it mattered. Only the weight of her children in her arms. Only their breath against her neck. Only the knowledge that they were together again. Eleanor stood in the doorway. 78 years old, daughter of civil rights marchers who'd walked the streets of Houston in 1963, granddaughter of sharecroppers who'd known the particular terror of living black in East Texas. Her hands gripped the doorframe, trembling with something far older and deeper than fear. When Lorraine finally guided the children inside, Eleanor's voice came out quiet and terrible. "They put handcuffs on you in front of your babies?" Lorraine nodded, unable to speak past the rage lodged in her throat. Eleanor's eyes glistened. Her jaw tightened. 60 years of civil rights progress, and here stood her daughter, a federal judge, handcuffed in a grocery store parking lot while her grandchildren screamed. "What are you going to do?" Lorraine looked at her mother, then at Damon and Zoe still pressed against her sides, their tear-streaked faces turned up toward her. "I'm going to dismantle them." That night, the children refused to sleep in the guest room. Zoe positioned herself against Lorraine's left side, fingers twisted in the fabric of her shirt. Damon lay on her right, close enough that she could feel his breathing. Neither would let her out of sight. Neither would close their eyes until exhaustion finally claimed them. Lorraine lay awake in the darkness, listening to her children breathe, and began to document everything. Sunday morning found Lorraine at her mother's kitchen table, yellow legal pad filled with her precise handwriting. The October sunlight streamed through lace curtains Eleanor had hung 30 years ago. The smell of coffee mixed with the lingering scent of the bacon and eggs she'd made to coax the children into eating. Damon and Zoe sat in the living room, cartoon voices drifting in from the television, neither of them ready to be more than a room away from their mother. Lorraine wrote, timestamps, 10:23 a.m. Agents exit vehicle, 10:26 a.m. First demand for identification, 10:34 a.m. Handcuffs applied, 10:41 a.m. Transported from scene, 2:58 p.m. Identity verified, 3:12 p.m. Released. Badge numbers, Hargrove's visible on his vest during arrest, Fullerton's mentioned during processing, Rawlings captured in bystander footage. Exact quotes. Everyone claims to be someone important. That's 4 from this zone this week. Regional's going to love the numbers. These neighborhoods are easy. Nobody fights back. The quota conversation, word for word, exactly as spoken, committed to memory in the back of that Tahoe, and now preserved on paper. Her children's trauma, Zoe's collapse on the pavement, Damon's cracking voice trying to defend her. The nightmares that would come, the therapy that would be needed, the trust that had been shattered. Her phone buzzed. Another notification. The bystander videos were everywhere now. Lorraine spent an hour downloading every angle she could find. 6 different recordings from 6 different phones. The woman 3 spaces over, the teenager near the cart return, an elderly man by the entrance, a Whole Foods employee who'd filmed from inside. 2 others she couldn't identify, all of them capturing the same thing from different perspectives. Her calm assertions, her credentials dismissed, her children's terror, the handcuffs clicking shut. She backed up each video to 3 separate locations, cloud storage, external hard drive, emailed to herself and her personal attorney. By noon, her phone was ringing constantly. Word had spread through the federal judiciary like wildfire. Colleagues from the bench calling in shock and fury. A Ninth Circuit judge she'd known for 15 years. A D.C. Circuit judge who'd clerked with her decades ago. The chief judge of her own district demanding to know what he could do. The message was unanimous. This cannot stand. Lorraine looked at the legal pad filled with evidence. Looked at her children in the next room, still too afraid to let her out of sight. Thought about her grandmother who'd marched in Houston, her father who'd been denied service at lunch counters, the legacy of fighting back that ran through her blood. Settlement offers would come, confidentiality agreements, pressure to make this go away quietly. She thought about all the others who'd been stopped in those easy neighborhoods, the ones who didn't have her credentials, the ones who didn't have bystander phones, the ones who couldn't fight back. This wasn't going to be settled quietly. This was going to trial. Samuel Okonkwo's office occupied the corner of the 14th floor in a downtown Dallas high-rise. The walls told his story better than any biography could. Framed verdicts from 30 years of dismantling institutional racism, photographs with civil rights icons, newspaper clippings from cases that had changed how America understood discrimination. Lorraine sat across from him 2 weeks after the parking lot, her documentation spread across his mahogany desk. Okonkwo read in silence, his expression darkened with each page. The timestamps, the badge numbers, the bystander video descriptions. The children's psychological intake forms from their first therapy session, Zoe's nightmares, Damon's sudden fear of anyone in uniform. When he reached the yellow legal pad page detailing the SUV conversation, he stopped, looked up sharply, his reading glasses catching the afternoon light. They said this where you could hear them? Word for word. Lorraine's voice was steady. Hargrove told Fullerton, "That's 4 from this zone this week. Regional's going to love the numbers." She responded that these neighborhoods are easy. Nobody fights back. "And you documented this when?" "Within 6 hours of release. Written notes first, then typed and time-stamped. I also recorded a verbal account on my phone immediately after leaving the facility." Okonkwo leaned back in his chair. A slow smile spread across his face, though his eyes held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of a man who had just been handed a winning case. "Judge Ashford, they didn't just violate your rights." He tapped the legal pad with one finger. "They handed you the blueprint to expose an entire system, quota-based enforcement, targeting minority neighborhoods, performance metrics tied to detention numbers. This isn't one bad stop. This is policy." Lorraine nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here. They're going to offer you money, significant money, with confidentiality agreements designed to bury this forever." "I'm not interested in money." Okonkwo studied her for a long moment. "What are you interested in?" "A trial. Public. Every document in the open. Every email exposed. Every agent on the stand explaining exactly how they decide who looks illegal." Lorraine leaned forward. "I want the entire country watching when we prove this is systematic." Okonkwo's smile widened. "Then let's give them something to watch." The lawsuit filed 4 weeks later in the United States District Court for the District of Minnesota. The defendants, the United States of America, the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and agents Vincent Hargrove, Denise Fullerton, and Keith Rawlings in their individual capacities. The charges were specific and devastating: unlawful detention, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, racial profiling in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, intentional infliction of emotional distress, denial of due process, deprivation of civil rights under color of federal authority. The evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage from all 3 agents showing the complete encounter, 6 bystander videos providing additional angles, Whole Foods security footage from 3 cameras covering the parking lot, Judge Ashford's credentials, her 23-year service record, her unanimous Senate confirmation, psychological evaluations documenting trauma in both children, testimony from witnesses who'd watched the arrest unfold. The government's first settlement offer arrived 6 weeks after filing. $100,000, dismissal with prejudice, comprehensive non-disclosure agreement sealing all evidence and prohibiting any public discussion. Okonkwo called Lorraine with the number. She didn't hesitate. "No." The second offer came 3 months later, after discovery had begun revealing the scope of documentation. $500,000. Same confidentiality terms. "No." The third offer arrived as discovery intensified. $1.5 million. No confidentiality requirement this time, just dismissal and silence. Lorraine considered it for exactly as long as it took to think about Zoe's face in that parking lot. "No. We're going to trial." Discovery blew the case open. Okonkwo's team subpoenaed internal ICE communications from the Minneapolis regional office. What came back confirmed everything Lorraine had heard in that Tahoe. Emails discussing performance metrics tied to detention numbers. Supervisors praising agents for high-yield operations in specific zip codes. Maps with minority neighborhoods highlighted and labeled priority zones. Quarterly reports showing bonuses linked to arrest quotas. Training materials that never once mentioned reasonable suspicion or Fourth Amendment constraints. The pattern was undeniable. Detention rates in the targeted neighborhoods ran 4 times higher than in predominantly white areas with identical demographic profiles. Same cities, same economic conditions, different skin colors, different outcomes. Do you believe federal agents should face stricter oversight when enforcing immigration law in American neighborhoods? Drop yes or no in the comments below. Share why accountability like this matters, why it could prevent stories like this from traumatizing families just trying to buy groceries on a Saturday morning. Okonkwo added the discovery documents to the trial exhibits, every email, every map, every bonus calculation. The blueprint Hargrove and Fullerton had handed Lorraine in the back of that SUV was about to become the most expensive conversation in ICE history. The Warren E. Burger Federal Courthouse stood against a gray March sky 14 months after that Saturday morning in the Whole Foods parking lot. Winter still clung to Minneapolis, patches of dirty snow lining the sidewalks, the air sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Lorraine entered through the main doors at 8:15 a.m. Professional attire, navy suit, minimal jewelry, her judicial bearing evident in every step. Behind her walked Damon and Zoe, both dressed carefully for a day they would remember for the rest of their lives. Eleanor held their hands, her 78 years of Texas strength anchoring them all. The gallery was packed before the doors officially opened. Federal judges filled the first 2 rows, colleagues from the Northern District of Texas, judges from the 8th Circuit who had traveled specifically for this. A Supreme Court justice's former clerk, now a professor at Georgetown, who had written extensively about Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, the judiciary watching one of their own seek justice. Civil rights organizations occupied the rows behind them, ACLU representatives, NAACP Legal Defense Fund attorneys, immigration advocacy groups who saw this case as a defining moment, activists wearing black t-shirts with white lettering, End Racial Profiling. National media filled the press section, CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, Washington Post. Cameras prohibited inside the courtroom, but reporters ready with notebooks, recording every word for the evening broadcasts. At the defense table sat Hargrove, Fullerton, and Rawlings. Suits instead of tactical gear, ties instead of badges. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the formal setting, flanked by federal attorneys whose expressions carried the weight of an unwinnable position. The Honorable William Sandoval took the bench at precisely 9 a.m., silver-haired, sharp-eyed, known throughout the 8th Circuit for precision and fairness. He surveyed the packed courtroom, nodded once, and called the proceedings to order. The jury filed in. 12 Minnesotans, diverse in age and background, their faces carefully neutral. 8 women, 4 men, a retired teacher, a small business owner, a nurse, a construction foreman, ordinary citizens about to decide extraordinary questions. Okonkwo rose for his opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you something. He pressed a button on his laptop. 6 screens around the courtroom flickered to life, displaying synchronized footage from different angles. This is October 23rd of last year. 10:23 a.m., a Whole Foods parking lot. The jury watched Judge Lorraine Ashford load groceries with her children, watched 3 agents converge in tactical formation, watched a 7-year-old girl begin to cry at the sight of armed men approaching her mother. They watched Lorraine identify herself calmly, repeatedly, while the agents dismissed her credentials. They watched her cite the Fourth Amendment, while Hargrove's hand moved toward his belt. They watched her comply slowly, hands raised, voice steady. They watched Zoe collapse to her knees, screaming. They watched the handcuffs click shut. When the footage ended, 2 jurors were wiping their eyes. The rest stared at the frozen final frame, Judge Lorraine Ashford being walked toward a federal vehicle while her children reached for her through a crowd of strangers. 23 years on the federal bench, Okonkwo said quietly, and this is how she was treated, not because of anything she did, because of how she looked. Judge Ashford's testimony lasted 2 days. She walked the jury through her career, graduated top of her class from Howard University School of Law, clerked for a 6th Circuit judge, 15 years as a federal prosecutor, appointed to the bench by a Republican president who called her brilliant and fair, confirmed by the Senate 98-0, 23 years of service to the Constitution. Then she described that Saturday morning. My daughter noticed them first. Her voice remained steady, but the courtroom felt the weight beneath it. Zoe saw the armed men approaching and started to cry. She was 7 years old, holding grapes she'd snuck from the grocery bag, and suddenly there were 3 federal agents in tactical gear walking toward her mother. She recounted every detail: Hargrove's flat demand for papers, her identification as a federal judge, the dismissal, the escalation, Damon's grocery bag hitting the pavement, oranges rolling across the asphalt, Zoe's sobs growing louder with each passing second. I told them I was a sitting federal judge. I offered to have my credentials verified. Agent Hargrove's response was, "Everyone claims to be someone important. Papers. Now." The quota conversation came next. Defense attorneys erupted with objections. Hearsay, lack of corroboration, prejudicial. Judge Sandoval overruled each one, noting the testimony's relevance to pattern and practice claims. Lorraine recounted the words exactly as spoken. "That's 4 from this zone this week. Regional's going to love the numbers." And Fullerton's response, "These neighborhoods are easy. Nobody fights back." The jury leaned forward. Several took notes furiously. Dr. Helen Nakamura, a child psychologist with 30 years of experience, testified about Zoe and Damon's trauma, the nightmares that still woke Zoe screaming, Damon's inability to see a police officer without his heart rate spiking, trust in authority figures shattered at ages 7 and 9. These children watched their mother handcuffed and taken away for no reason they could understand. Dr. Nakamura explained, the psychological impact of that experience, particularly at their developmental stages, cannot be overstated. Cross-examination attempted to paint Lorraine as confrontational, aggressive, uncooperative. Okonkwo simply replayed the body camera footage. The jury watched Lorraine keep her hands visible throughout, watched her voice remain calm despite her daughter's screams, watched her comply with every command while clearly articulating her constitutional objections, watched the agents ignore her credentials, dismiss her identification, proceed with arrest despite zero evidence of any wrongdoing. Professor David Oyeleran from Yale Law School testified as an expert witness. "This is a textbook Fourth Amendment violation," he stated. "No reasonable suspicion, no probable cause, no articulable facts supporting the stop. Any reasonable officer would have known this detention was unconstitutional. The case law is settled and has been for decades." The defense's qualified immunity argument crumbled under the weight of Lorraine's own expertise. She had cited specific constitutional protections while being detained. She had articulated exactly why the stop was unlawful. She had given them every opportunity to verify her identity and release her. They had proceeded anyway. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Lorraine spent them at her mother's house in Street Paul, the March wind rattling the windows, snow flurries drifting past the glass. She answered Damon and Zoe's questions with age-appropriate honesty, explained what the jury was doing, what guilty meant, what not guilty meant. Prepared them for any outcome because that was what a mother did, even a mother who also happened to be a federal judge who knew exactly how unpredictable juries could be. "What if they say the men didn't do anything wrong?" Zoe asked on the 3rd night, her small face serious in the lamplight. Lorraine pulled her daughter close. "Then we'll know we told the truth. We'll know we fought, and sometimes that has to be enough." But she prayed it wouldn't come to that. On the 4th day, the jury sent word, verdict reached. The courtroom filled to capacity within an hour. Every seat occupied. Reporters lined the walls. The federal judges returned, filling the first rows again. Civil rights leaders, community activists, strangers who had followed the case and driven hours to witness the outcome. Damon and Zoe remained with Eleanor in a private room down the hall, shielded from whatever came next. Old enough to understand the stakes, too young to carry the weight of watching it unfold. Lorraine sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, breathing steady. Okonkwo beside her, his own composure masking whatever calculations ran through his mind. 14 months of preparation. Thousands of hours of work. Everything reduced to 12 strangers and a verdict form. Judge Sandoval took the bench. The courtroom fell silent. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and steady hands. We have, Your Honor. The verdict form passed from jury to bailiff to judge. Sandoval reviewed it without expression. Then he read, on the charge of unlawful detention in violation of the Fourth Amendment, liable. The word echoed through the courtroom. On the charge of racial profiling in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, liable. Lorraine's hands tightened in her lap. On the charge of intentional infliction of emotional distress, liable. On the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of federal authority, liable. Liable on all counts. Unanimous on every charge. The damages phase began immediately. Expert witnesses testified about career impact, the psychological toll, the nationwide implications of allowing such violations to go unpunished. Economists calculated lost wages and future therapy costs. Constitutional scholars explained why punitive damages were essential to deter future misconduct. The jury deliberated for 6 more hours. The final award, $15.8 million, $8.3 million in compensatory damages for the violations, the trauma, the harm to her children, the injury to her reputation and career. $7.5 million in punitive damages, calculated specifically to punish the government for fostering a system that treated quotas as more important than constitutional rights. The courtroom erupted. Applause broke out despite Judge Sandoval's gavel. Supporters in the gallery stood, some crying, some cheering. The federal judges in the front rows nodded with grim satisfaction. Reporters scrambled for their phones. At the defense table, Hargrove stared at the floor. Fullerton had gone pale. Rawlings sat motionless, his face blank with shock. The federal attorneys were already gathering papers, already calculating appeals, already preparing for the aftermath of catastrophic defeat. Lorraine remained still, her eyes closed, her hands finally unclenched. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about Zoe's scream in that parking lot, about Damon's cracking voice trying to defend her, about every person stopped in those easy neighborhoods who couldn't fight back. It was about the line she had drawn and the system that had just learned the cost of crossing it. The consequences came swiftly. Hargrove and Fullerton were terminated within 72 hours of the verdict. Official statements cited conduct unbecoming and violation of agency protocols. Rawlings received an indefinite suspension pending internal investigation. Their careers in federal law enforcement were over. ICE announced sweeping policy reviews, mandatory bias training for all field agents, new oversight committees with civilian participation, updated protocols requiring verification of identification claims before detention, body camera footage subject to automatic review in any stop involving constitutional objections. The Department of Justice opened an independent investigation into quota-based enforcement practices nationwide. Ashford v. United States entered the legal lexicon within months. Civil rights attorneys cited it in cases across the country. Law schools added it to constitutional law curricula. The verdict became a reference point, a precedent, proof that Fourth Amendment violations had consequences even when committed by federal agents. Lorraine returned to her bench in Dallas 6 weeks after the trial. The same chambers, the same nameplate on the door, the same robe hanging in the closet, but something had shifted. Her rulings on Fourth Amendment cases carried new weight now, written by someone who understood the violations not just as legal abstractions but as lived experience. She established the Ashford Foundation with $3 million of the settlement, legal aid for victims of unlawful detention who couldn't afford representation, scholarships for law students from marginalized communities, Know Your Rights workshops in the same neighborhoods that had been flagged as high-yield zones. The trauma didn't disappear overnight. Zoe still woke sometimes with nightmares, though less frequently now. Damon still tensed around uniformed officers, though therapy was teaching him to distinguish fear from danger. But healing came in small moments too. Damon's class assignment that spring asked students to describe someone they admired. He wrote about his mother, not about the verdict or the money or the headlines, about what she'd told him the night before the jury returned. My mom said sometimes telling the truth and fighting for what's right has to be enough. But she also said when you can win, you should win as loud as possible so everyone hears. She fights for the Constitution. That's her job, and she's really good at it. Zoe drew a picture for Eleanor's refrigerator, her mother in judge's robes, holding a gavel, standing in front of a courthouse. Above it, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "My mommy protects people." The parking lot faded into memory. The handcuffs, the cell, the 4 hours and 17 minutes of not knowing where her children were. But the victory remained. Documented, precedented, permanent. Years accumulated the way they always do. Cases decided, precedents set. The steady work of constitutional interpretation that had defined Lorraine's career long before that October morning and continued long after. Judge Ashford remained on the federal bench, her rulings sharper now, her commitment to Fourth Amendment protections deepened by experience no legal textbook could provide. When defendants claimed their rights had been violated, she listened differently. When government attorneys argued reasonable suspicion, she probed deeper. She had sat in the holding cell. She had heard the quota conversation. She knew what systemic abuse looked like from the inside. The ripple effects of the verdict spread outward. Other victims came forward. People who had been stopped in those high-yield zones. Families who had been separated during compliance checks. Citizens who had been detained for hours based on nothing but appearance. The Ashford Foundation provided attorneys. The evidence patterns established during discovery became templates for new lawsuits. What had happened to one federal judge became proof of what had happened to thousands of ordinary people. Similar cases filed across the country. Phoenix, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, each one citing Ashford v. United States, each one building on the foundation she had laid. Settlements grew larger, policy changes accelerated. The quota system that Hargrove and Fullerton had discussed so casually became the subject of congressional hearings. Systemic change came slowly, the way it always does. But it came. The Whole Foods on Hennepin Avenue installed a small bronze plaque near the entrance 3 years after the verdict. Lorraine didn't attend the ceremony, didn't want cameras or speeches or the weight of being a symbol, but Eleanor sent her a photograph. Witness injustice, document truth, demand accountability. Below the words, a QR code linked to resources on civil rights and legal aid. Shoppers passed it daily, most without noticing, but some stopped to read, some took pictures. Some looked up the case and learned what had happened in that parking lot and why documentation and witnesses and refusing to stay silent mattered. Lorraine drove past grocery stores often. Saturday errands, ordinary moments, the kind of routine that most people never thought twice about. She thought about it, thought about the woman she had been that October morning, already accomplished, already distinguished. 23 years on the federal bench, hundreds of cases decided, a career that would have been remarkable even if nothing had happened in that parking lot. But something had happened, and the woman she'd become was different, not broken, transformed. Her credentials hadn't protected her that day, but they had given her the tools to fight back. Her children's trauma had become the catalyst for protecting other people's children. Her rage had been channeled into method, evidence, precision. The sharpest weapon wasn't anger. It was preparation meeting opportunity. It was knowing the law so well that you could dismantle the people who violated it. It was refusing to settle quietly when public accountability could prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. 5 years after the verdict, on a Saturday morning in late October, Lorraine pulled into a grocery store parking lot with her children. Damon was 14 now, nearly as tall as she was, earbuds in, scrolling through his phone. Zoe was 12, chattering about a school project. Her earlier trauma faded to occasional shadows that therapy had taught her to manage. Teenagers. Ordinary teenagers doing ordinary things. They loaded groceries into the SUV, autumn air crisp and cool, leaves scattered across the pavement, the familiar rhythm of a weekend errand. No agents appeared, no demands for papers, no handcuffs, no screaming. Just a mother and her children existing freely in a parking lot, the way it should have been all along. Lorraine closed the trunk and looked at Damon and Zoe, at the young people they were becoming, at the future they would build. The line she had drawn in that Minneapolis parking lot still held firm. Power, when abused, met consequences. Systems, when exposed, faced reform. Underestimated brilliance remained the sharpest weapon. She had shown them, the agents, the institution, the entire country, that some people do fight back. That credentials matter. That constitutional rights aren't just words on parchment, but protections that must be defended. And she had shown her children something more important. That fear doesn't have to be the end of the story. That trauma can become purpose. That their mother, when tested, had stood firm and prevailed. Lorraine climbed into the driver's seat. Damon claimed the front passenger position, the privilege of teenage years. Zoe sprawled across the back with her phone. "Grandma's expecting us for lunch," Lorraine said. "Can we stop for donuts?" Zoe asked. "You just ate grapes." "That was like an hour ago," Damon laughed. Lorraine smiled. The SUV pulled out of the lot. Saturday morning. Ordinary errands. A family moving through the world without incident, the way it always should have been. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers, everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results. There's a maintenance plan so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now, if you think this case was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right.
Welcome. Our objective is clear: to pursue the truth and hold established power to account. We follow the paper trail because the official records never lie. Thank you for watching and seeking the facts with us.